and on behalf of the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar titled New Directions in Drug Approval in Canada. I'm going to start the introduction very soon. I just want to make sure that as many people as possible are on who are waiting. Meanwhile, we'll talk about if you're having a sound problem. So if you can see me but not hear me, check that your computer speaker, which looks like this, it's on the right-hand bottom of your screen. And click to turn it on. So that has really eliminated about 90% of our calls that there's no sound. So we hope that's well heard. Now we're going to look at our startup for the, there's a lot of you here. So we'll look at the startup. We're going to get going. So I'm Mona Forrest, and on behalf of the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network, welcome to today's webinar, New Directions in Drug Approval in Canada. We'll examine how new treatments are reviewed and approved for sale in Canada, with a particular emphasis on Health Canada's regulatory modernization initiative. They have to learn some regular speak over there. It will also be an opportunity to discuss patient involvement in Health Canada reviews, as well as the Special Access Program, and we all want to hear about that. We'll be joined by Bill Dempster, co-founder of 360 Public Affairs, and John Peter Bradford, Executive Director of Life Saving Therapies Network. For those of you who haven't attended an earlier webinar, this webinar is hosted by the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network. At CCSN, we work with patients, survivors, families, partner groups, and sponsors on collaborative action to identify and remove barriers to optional patient care. We work to ensure access to education and action opportunities and survivor involvement in healthcare decision-making, very important one. And we work to support evidence-based research on ways to promote equal access to early diagnosis, timely treatment, follow-up, survivorship care. If you'd like to learn more about CCSN, you can visit us on our website, which is www.survivornet.ca. And right now on our front page, you can read about our previous webinars. If you've missed any of those, you can access them right there on demand. Also, be sure to check out the Participate sidebar on our front page to find out more about opportunities for you to become involved here and all over Canada. And we'd like to thank our 2015 webinar series funders, Novartis, Merck, and especially Boehringer Ingelheim for making today's webinar possible. Now we're going to send you over to Bill.
Looks like Bill might still have his mic muted there. Bill, you might want to just click that that mic button, make sure it's on.
So I just did again, sound check, Matt. Can you hear me now?
You're good.
Okay, great. So again, my name is Bill Dempster, and I'm CEO of 360 Public Affairs, and we do health policy management consulting and advocacy based here in Ottawa, but we really do enjoy working with folks from across the country and sometimes even globally. So great to hear that Philadelphia is on the line. Today, I'm really happy to be joined by John Peter Bradford. John Peter has been a regular participant on these webinars, and today he's joining us in his capacity as Executive Director of LISTEN, the Life Saving Therapies Network. It's a network of patients, advocate groups, oncologists, researchers, industry, and others to provide thought leadership and educational resources for network members about reforming regulations for the approval of and access to treatments for lethal diseases. And that's why you've been regularly on these webinars to learn about the different stages of the cancer treatment review process and funding. But you've had some of your own stories and experiences in the cancer world. In fact, you co-authored or you wrote a book called Journeys in Cancerland in 2010. So I don't I can't think of anyone better positioned to help lead a webinar with me than you, John Peter. Really happy to have you here.
I'm really happy to listen to everything you have to say.
Listen.
Listen.
LSTN.
Listen.
Okay.
LSTN. Life Saving Therapies Network.
Excellent. Thank you. We're going to try to...
.com.
.com. Brought to you by the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network. This is good. So I'm going to kick the webinar off with a high-level overview of Canada's regulatory review system for new treatments, along with Health Canada's modernization initiative. And I'm going to then pass it over to John Peter, who will walk us through the case for reform to support access to treatments for lethal diseases. And we're going to leave around 15 minutes at the end for Q's and A's and discussion. And as we're speaking and talking, please feel free to get your questions ready. There is a box and a little arrow on the right-hand side of your screen for either questions or the chat box, either of which should work for you to be able to interact with us. So with that, let's kick it off. Many of you are probably already familiar with the review process. Before we were talking about Health Canada approval. In fact, Health Canada authorizes new products for sale in Canada. So that's the term that they like to use is approval. All new drug evaluations begin with a new drug submission, and that's sent to Health Canada to the Health Products and Food branch by a developer, a manufacturer, or someone who owns the license and the rights to actually eventually sell that product here. There are three types generally, and there are subtypes of those new drug submissions. A new drug submission is one for a new therapy that has never been approved in Canada. An abbreviated new drug submission is used for generics or multi-source products. And then there's a supplemental new drug submission, and that's when you have a drug that's already approved, but for which you have a new dosage form, strength, or indication. The manufacturer has studied it further and found another use for that. I should say, increasingly, cancer products, some of the new immunotherapy products, for example.
PD-1 and PD-L1 started as melanoma drugs, and now they're used for lung cancer and other things.
Yeah, and up to like 25 different tumors from solid to non-solid tumors. So really exciting time to be in the cancer world. The submission that the manufacturer will provide includes data on the drug's safety, effectiveness, and quality. And those are the three things that Health Canada is looking to review. The studies can be done in Canada or elsewhere. And the manufacturer will also provide details on the packaging, the labeling, what it will actually show to consumers and to healthcare professionals. And those will detail what the product is supposed to do and the side effects that they have noticed in the clinical trials and the research. So Health Canada does a thorough review of all that information. It used to be actually driven down to Health Canada in a massive truck, and boxes were unloaded. Today, it can be actually submitted electronically in much smaller information. That said, the actual amount of data that goes into these reviews is still phenomenal. Thousands and thousands of pages of data on each new product. If at the completion of the review, the conclusion is that the benefits outweigh the risks and that the risks can be mitigated, the drug is issued a notice of compliance, or an NOC, as you'll hear people call it, as well as a drug identification number, and that allows the drug sponsor to actually market and sell the product in Canada. So that's the general process. I should say that there are lots of things that can happen along this bumpy road from the new drug submission to issuance of an NOC. Health Canada can have questions about the clinical data. There can be issues that come up that they didn't foresee and they would issue a request for clarification or a clarifax to the sponsor. If they're concerned about what they're looking at, they can issue a notice of deficiency, saying that, look, this actually requires further evaluation. We can't go ahead and authorize this for sale. If at the end of an evaluation they say, look, we shouldn't let it out, they'll actually issue a notice of non-compliance, and then you can't. And in a handful of cases, they will issue a notice of compliance with conditions, and that will be an authorization for a product, but it will have conditions for monitoring by the sponsor, by the manufacturer. It could be follow-up studies or further research, especially around clinical efficacy or safety. That's what they're looking for. And many of you have been on previous webinars where we talked briefly about Health Canada. This is the time where we're going to go a little bit deeper into what they're doing and how they're modernizing. But you'll also know that there's other steps before it gets to patient access. And just I'll make one final note here. Health Canada generally looks at a new product versus a placebo or versus the standard of care, and is really looking for safety, efficacy, and quality. It's not looking at cost effectiveness or comparative clinical effectiveness to all the different products or different therapeutic interventions. And I heard Chandra Segal from the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health is on the line. That's for the Health Technology Assessment Review at the pan-Canadian level. That's the review stage where the manufacturer will submit much of the same data as they would to Health Canada, but they would also pick a comparator product and say this is why this offers therapeutic advantages for this population. And so what you end up with is Health Canada saying, look, this can be used for X number of people. But when you go to CADITH and HTA, it might actually say, okay, it actually makes more sense for this product to be used for Y number of people. And then by the time it gets down to the actual patient access and the criteria that you require to meet in order to get access to it, and actually paid for, funded by the public system or sometimes by the private system, it can really needle down the actual numbers of products that patients can use. So I should also say that Health Canada reviews the clinical trials, and especially in the cancer world, access to clinical trials is often access to therapy, and that's really important. And so a manufacturer or a developer will submit their clinical trial with which sites they're going to use in Canada, and Health Canada will approve that, and so the use of that product can be put into these mainly cancer centers. Health Canada also looks at it and provides establishment licenses to wherever these products are going to be produced, packaged, and sent out from. They do compliance monitoring, verification, investigation, and post-marketing safety. And there's actually a whole other branch of Health Canada called the Marketed Health Products Directorate that is responsible for listening and watching for adverse events and other issues that come up when the product is on the market. And as you'll see later in the webinar, Health Canada is getting more and more proactive about monitoring a product throughout its life cycle and trying to pick up more data as it goes through. Health Canada also reviews imported products and the testing standards and manufacturing facilities where the products are produced. And as many of you know, or maybe you don't know, much of the active ingredients in these products are actually produced in India and overseas, and then packaged here or there and brought in. So it is really important function for Health Canada to provide Canadians assurances that what they're getting off of these huge pallets of medicines from elsewhere, that it is what the manufacturer says it is. So Health Canada's traditional role in terms of product review was reviewing products at certain points in time. As I said before, if a study is conducted in Canada, they'll review and approve that clinical trial design. And then they're going to approve it over a longer period of time and with much more data, as I said before, in terms of the submission review. And then finally, they're looking for adverse events and other more reactive issues that come up once the product is on the market. And that's the traditional role of Health Canada. But as you can see from drug discovery at the top of this slide, to preclinical studies, clinical trials, etc., there is a lot more knowledge that gets demonstrated and built throughout this life cycle. And Health Canada around 10 years ago realized that it was not keeping up with the European Union and the US FDA as much as it needed to, and so it began a regulatory modernization initiative. And this has been called several things over the last decade plus, ranging from blueprint for renewal to a progressive licensing project to a roadmap for regulatory change. I think the roadmap is still the term that is used now, and regulatory modernization. Health Canada realized that with new technology, the need to work with their global counterparts, new public health threats and needs, and this move towards international alignment and mutual recognition, And maybe most importantly, and this is maybe for our discussion later, the whole patient-centered healthcare movement, and the idea that we need patients right at the beginning of the drug life cycle to weigh in. And so they are actually doing a couple of pilot projects on patient input, and we'll get to that when John Peter starts talking about the value of that input. So the Health Canada Regulatory Modernization Initiative took an evolving life cycle approach. It looked at its current toolbox and said, look, we don't have what we need to keep up with our international counterparts and ensure the health and safety of Canadians based on some of the new technologies that are coming in, what our counterparts are doing, et cetera. And in fact, the resources that Health Canada needs to be able to review these products effectively. So the new tools that they were looking to build in would allow them to monitor, review, and sometimes be more proactive and intervene when necessary throughout the product lifecycle. And they can require information, require tests or studies. Even after something has been discontinued, they can require more clinical trials, labels or packaging to be revised, reassessment, the disclosure of risk information. They can make amendments to whatever license that they actually gave, the notice of compliance that they've given to a manufacturer. They were looking for enhanced inspectorate or inspection powers and the ability to unilaterally stop sale, suspend, or cancel that authorization. Many of these authorities that I just walked through, at least at the legislative level, were given to Health Canada as part of Bill 17, also known as Vanessa's Law, or the Protecting Canadians from Unsafe Drugs Act. And I'll show you a few things that does very shortly. Generally, there are three objectives to Health Canada's Regulatory Modernization Initiative. They are looking to facilitate access to new therapies. That's number one. They want to do continuous monitoring, assessment, and communication of product information. This is important. They will continue to do a benefits versus risk assessment through the product lifecycle. But what I've heard in the last couple of years is a real move towards away from, I should say, the word risk. They're looking for benefits versus harms, because the idea, the word risk, suggests that the safety concerns that Health Canada might see might not be viewed in the same light as somebody who is dying from a lethal disease. And I think we're going to get into that a little bit later, and maybe to even talk about what the value is of that benefits harms ratio or question that Health Canada is applying to these. Finally, they want to ensure and help and encourage the optimal use of therapeutic products to maximize benefits and minimize risks. And I should say something there. You see, it's about optimal use of therapeutic products. So instead of talking about an individual drug and saying drugs are drugs, medical devices are medical devices, diagnostics, etc., they're all therapeutic products going forward. That's what they're trying to get to anyway. And they're taking a risk-based approach to that. So if Band-Aids don't represent that much of a risk, then they won't be reviewing or requiring the same kind of information as they would on a new biologic injectable product for which there might be other risks or issues that could come up. So I think that's an important part of modernization as well, is finding some common principles and approaches across the different interventions that Health Canada actually reviews. So, just a few things that the Protecting Canadians from Unsafe Drugs Act of 2014 empowered the government to do: recall unsafe products, impose tough new penalties for those who sell unsafe products. That's increased, like, really big fines if any violations are intentional. They can compel companies to revise product labels, conduct additional testing, mandatory adverse event reporting by hospitals and healthcare institutions. Increased transparency around their decisions, public posting of all Canadian clinical trial information, clarity regarding what constitutes confidential business information, and requirement for the disclosure of health risks when they are apparent. What I should say is this is enabling legislation. It's not how it will actually work in practice, or necessarily suggesting that Health Canada is going to put in place all of the things that it could possibly do under this act. In fact, the first couple of things that they're hoping to do are plain language labeling, make the regulations around that will actually John Peter, you're laughing about plain language labeling. As if get out one of your labels and read it. We'll see how plain
This
language
drug
that
is bad for you.
That's very plain. Thank you. Oh boy. But I should say that the other really important, one of the other really important first things that Health Canada is very committed to doing is an orphan drug regulatory framework, and that's actually where they're going to be test driving the idea of that being a therapeutic product, and quite a number of things will come through with the orphan drug regulatory framework. Other things that Health Canada might do under this is allow for rolling submissions, or as the data comes to light or is available, a manufacturer will be able to actually provide that even while Health Canada has already started its review on the product itself, so that it's not like a point in time, every clock stops on submitting any new information on a given product. As new information becomes available, that can actually be provided to Health Canada. Health Canada is not on its own at all, and the international collaboration, harmonization, and mutual recognition efforts are well at work. Health Canada actually has memoranda of understanding with most of the developed country regulators and jurisdictions around the world, especially and notably the European Union and the Food and Drugs Administration in the United States. And with the EU, that's really a jurisdiction to keep an eye out on, because they've got an adaptive pathways pilot project that's going on right now. And I know Health Canada is watching it very closely, as is CADIT and others, to say, how can we allow for faster access to new products based on a little bit less information, but once it's on the market and it's being used by people, how are we going to be able to collect that data in a very effective way, change the labeling and other issues around it, potentially expand the use of that. And I think that John Peter is going to have some ideas on how we can actually do that in Canada. So in terms of what's needed next on regulatory reform, there's been quite a few headlines and articles and issues written on access to cancer drugs. This is making reference to a study done by Nigel Rawson, and finding that there's delayed access for oncology products in Canada compared to how they are reviewed in other jurisdictions. And then there's the counterpoint to that, and that's people who ask, is waiting longer for new prescription drug approvals necessarily a bad thing? And some argue that Canada's slow and low approach to new pharmaceuticals may be prudent, and in fact, the example used in that case was Vioxx, as in take a little bit longer, and we're going to be able to find out some more information, and we'll know a little bit more about the safety issues. But that brings us, I think, to our guest host today, who certainly has another opinion from that one, and John Peter and his co-author and co-collaborator, I should say, in Listen and elsewhere, in improving the oncology regime in Canada, Dr. David Stewart just pulled a screenshot up from the Globe and Mail to benefit from new cancer drugs, reform the regulatory regime. So I'm going to pass it over to you, John Peter, and then we're going to bring it back and talk about a couple of those other issues towards the end, things like special access program, orphan drugs, national pharmacare, and the idea that the life cycle approach to a regulatory system might also imply or require a life cycle approach to some of the evaluation systems and other things, if we have time. I also want to hear from people on the line. So please, again, get ready with the chat box and the questions box. And so now over to you, John Peter. Tell us about progress-centered regulatory frameworks for lethal diseases.
Okay. First of all, I don't talk as quickly as Bill, and I'm not going to give you as much information as Bill. So my part of the exam will be easier. But I want to start by saying everything that Bill said is all well and good, but right now, the current regulatory framework is cumbersome, it's gunked up with unnecessary bureaucracy, it's costly, and it's inefficient. And the delays that it causes mean that many Canadians, and I'm going to talk about cancer mostly because we're talking stage 3, stage 4 cancer, are lethal diseases. That is, that they're diseases that are statistically pretty certain to kill you. these people don't get access to effective new treatments they could get. It could extend their lives, because a lot of them just want their lives extended. My wife died of a lethal cancer. She lived 16 months after being told she'd live 3 weeks. And it was only because we got her, she was the first person in Canada actually to get 2 drugs that were ungettable under the current system. But the people are being denied these new agents that can save or extend their lives. These things can save money, they can relieve suffering, and they can certainly reduce the hospital bills that people pay, because there are a lot of people in the hospital that are there because they just have no alternative. My wife lived 16 months, as I said, 15 of those with a lethal disease, widely metastasized cancer, and she had a good quality of life. So, well, I came into this, I'm a scientist by background and a businessman, but I came into this basically because I got angry and annoyed and disheartened at the state of the regulatory system in Canada. So we're focused on what we call a progress-centered regulatory framework. And basically, there are some things that go with this. First, let's take the regulatory framework, then let's take the clinical research protocols that go with it. They are part and parcel of the same thing. I'm just going to break them up because it might be easier to think about them separately. But remember, they go together, okay? Regulations right now, you're required to spend a lot of money and a lot of time doing preclinical toxicology and pharmacology assessments of drugs. It turns out that these are virtually useless statistically. There's a study in the Journal of Clinical Cancer Research that was published in October 2015, which I must confess I was one of the authors of, so I'm kind of biased, but shows that this that these are wastes of money and waste of time. All we need to know is to see if something is safe, is to know whether or not a dose which is lethal to 10% of rodents that are given it, 1/10 of that dose is actually safe for human beings. The healthcare system, another reason why it's gunked up and its problems, people talk about safety. In fact, Bill talked about safety, efficacy, and quality. Well, used to be it was 8 years. In 1960s, it was 8 years to get a drug approved. And again, I'm talking about lethal disease drugs. Now, the average time to approval is 13.9 years. It costs $1 billion on average to get that approval. And one of the reasons people, in fact, patient groups are one of the big problems here. They all want things to be safe. So we want to make sure that the drug you're going to get is safe, and it's a reasonable thing. You don't want to take drugs that are unsafe. But it's a misplaced kind of concern. When we studied 21 drugs that had been approved over 13.9 years on average to treat 11 lethal malignancies, each one of these drugs extended life significantly, statistically, with good quality. We found that 1 life year was lost every 12 seconds of regulatory delay. That means 240,000 plus life years were lost per year in North America, and 2.5 million life years were lost per year worldwide over the 13.9 years. Over the 6 to 23 years it took to approve these drugs, in other words, because it was an average 13.9, some were fast-tracked at 6, some were longer at 23, more than 31.5 million life years were lost worldwide. And more than 2.9 million of these were lost in North America. So you say, okay, well, it probably made it safer, right? We took a long time and a lot of people died, too bad, but made it safer. So how many life years do you think were saved in those 13.9 years? The total is 684. So 32 million is against 684 due to enhanced clinical research safety regulations. And our study didn't take into account drugs that have been approved via fast track mechanisms, because like for example, crizotinib and ceritinib, because in such cases the life years lost per year would be higher because the drugs are more effective, and so the people would last longer.
I should maybe make a quick point there, John Peter, and I forgot to. Typical Health Canada review is around 355 days if they follow their targets for processing, screening, evaluating a new product. A fast track review is significantly faster, and I think it's about 180 days. So it almost halves that time, and that's for severe or life-threatening diseases for which there aren't any good therapies. HIV.
380. You mean a year? It's a year to a half a year?
Well, yeah, that's right. Right.
Well, that's not the way approvals work. The approvals take long periods of time.
Correct.
From the time that the drug is, there's a phase 1, there's a phase 2, there's a phase 3.
Of course. As you're doing all the clinical,
we're talking all that stuff. Yeah. We're talking all that time, and all of that is part of the regulatory process and the research process.
You're right. But once the manufacturer submits to Health Canada, then with all of that phase 1, 2, and 3 data, I think what you're talking about is how can we get that submission earlier in the process that people get access to these products at an earlier phase. So sorry to interrupt, maybe keep on going.
Sure. I mean, still 355 days is a bit too long, but in any case, I'm talking about the whole process from the time the drug is patented, or we say we have a drug, till the time it's approved or authorized, or whatever the word is. It takes that average, right? Yeah. The amount of documentation in the clinical trials is very low value. It's excessive. Doctors sit for days ticking boxes to make sure that Mary got her drug at 12:39 p.m. and it was within the 2 hours that she was allowed, over 24 that she was allowed to get it. And they have to do it day by day by day, by patient by patient by patient. And these are not high value documentations. They're just simple kind of auditing tick boxes. The mindset and the culture of the bureaucracy and the regulators in both the approval process and the clinical research protocols are risk averse. In fact, if you talk privately to any of these people, they'll all tell you that the fear is that they'll be sued. This is not the way to get people who are dying and people with lethal diseases quick access to good drugs. There's a revolution about to happen, or is starting to happen in medicine with lethal diseases, especially cancers. It's called precision medicine, and basically it falls into 3 broad categories, although there'll be more evolve come down the pike. But one is what they call gene-targeted therapy. That's if you have a mutation called, say, an ALK-positive mutation or an EFGR mutation, and you have a drug that attacks and kills that mutation and that mutation only. It's a gene-targeted drug. The hope there is that you can make the cancer, you don't kill the cancer, but you make it into a manageable kind of chronic disease. The second kind of precision therapy, which is showing great promise, and which now, if you're in the stock market, could make a killing with, is immunotherapy. Immunotherapy, as you probably know, the body doesn't know if it's got cancer. The immune system can't recognize cancer, with 1 or 2 exceptions. And so all this stuff about taking, health food stuff to make your body fight cancer doesn't work unless the body knows it's got a cancer and tries to fight it. For years, they've been trying to figure out a way to get that to happen. And recently, and I'll use PD-1 and PD-L1 as the 2 melanoma drugs that made such a splash, somebody figured out how to flick a switch in the body so that the immune system could say, hey, there's a cancer there, let's go kill it. And in fact, they did. And the results have been spectacular. This is one of the industrial and digital revolution combined in medicine that we've been waiting for. Immunotherapy plus gene-targeted therapy, because we're going to be able to flick a whole bunch of switches. We haven't been able to figure out how to flick on the switches for all the immune system, but we can flick them on one by one. Now, the other thing that's interesting is John Bell in Ottawa here has just received $25 million. BioCanRx is on the call to do innovative research, but his main contribution so far has been what they call viral oncolytics. Now, viral oncolytics is a real flu shot. Like you go to the doctor to get a shot so you won't get the flu. You go to John and his lab to get the flu because they give you the flu. But in the flu is a little targeted missile that's targeted at your tumor or at your mutation. And the flu attacks all the cells in your body. You normally get the flu and your body recovers from the flu, except that when the flu encounters the mutation, it kills it. So the hope there is that viral oncolytics will also be another kind of precision medicine. And what I'm talking about when I talk about this progress-centered regulatory framework for lethal diseases is I'm really talking about precision medicine and precision medicine-like kinds of therapies, because they don't need the same kinds of research. They don't need randomized clinical trials. Randomized clinical trial is traditionally the gold standard for any research. When I taught at university, I used to teach randomized blocks design, which is what this is now called. In medicine, it's called now randomized clinical trial. It's 3 phases, and it has a blind. If you watch Fargo, the television show, there's a woman who's dying of cancer, and she's either going to get a drug or not get the drug. She'll get a placebo, and she gets the placebo and she dies. But randomized clinical trials usually require placebos, and they also miss targeted therapies, and they miss immunotherapies, because take crizotinib, for example. Crizotinib is a drug that works on an ALK-positive mutation in adenocarcinoma in the lung. 3% of the people who have lung cancer have this ALK-positive. When they tried crizotinib as in a randomized clinical trial, they gave it to 100 people, let's say 100, give an easy number to work with. 3 people responded. They said, drug's no good. Then somebody got the bright idea, wait a minute, let's look at the tumors of those 3 people. And they were all the same. And let's look at the tumors of the other 97. They weren't the same. And then somebody else found 3 others that worked. And finally they figured, it's a whack-a-mole. So we got a whack-a-mole here. We got a mole, we whack it. If it dies, the drug works. So when we start thinking about that, we start thinking about other kinds of clinical research that we can do besides randomized trials. I won't go into all the problems with randomized clinical trials, and I'm all for them when it comes to acne disease, acne drugs and stuff, because we do need them for other things. We need to be able to fast track drugs. If we have in a precision situation, a situation where, for example, in survivornet, which is just now, I don't know what the P-coder answer was, but anyway, it's a drug that follows on after crizotinib with lung cancer, and it's very effective. It got fast tracked, but because after phase 1 trial, it showed it wasn't toxic, and it showed they did a phase 1 trial which had enough phase 2 in it to make it look like it had efficacy, so they tried it, and then they did what they call post-market surveillance to follow it. We need that kind of stuff with precision medicine, and precision medicine lends itself to protocols that would work like that. So we need to revamp the clinical trial approval process to make it fast and efficient. Right now, we have a problem with multiple site trial activations. Usually, you have to drive to Kenora or to Ottawa or Toronto or someplace to get your drug, and everybody has to go to the same place if they're on the trial. There's no reason why, with all the genomic testing we have, we can't have a distributed trial with somebody who has an indication in Kenora, somebody else who has one in Sault Ste. Marie, 2 people have it in Philadelphia, 1 person that has it in Malaysia, 3 people in Oslo, can't all be on the same trial with the same drug. There are mechanisms we can put in place to train the principal investigators in each site to be able to do it very quickly. In the journal article, we call it a just-in-time activation. We have to allow scientists and oncologists, researchers, where there's benefit to the patient that's demonstrable, give them latitude in deviating from the protocols without requiring approved amendments. Right now, the way the most clinical trials are designed, they're designed as if it's a laboratory experiment in a petri dish, but it isn't. It's people, and they have what they call inclusion and exclusion criteria, and you have to have all the inclusion criteria, and you can't have any of the exclusion criteria. And they study a very, very small population of people, and they say, okay, the drug works or it doesn't work within these parameters, and it's got these side effects, and they're manageable or not manageable within these other parameters. And then guess what? It goes on the market, and they give it to everybody. I mean, so we have to have a more rational way, real-world way of defining the criteria for inclusion in clinical trials, and people, the investigators need to be able to make allowances where it makes sense for the patient. When we have a single agent study, that is, if we're only studying one drug, sometimes they study what happens if we take this drug and add it to this drug. I'm not talking about that. But if we have single agent study, we have one drug being studied, the only real way you can tell if a cancer is being affected is if the tumor shrinks. I mean, you can say, I feel better, but you can take a lot of vitamin C and you'll feel better too. You can help your cancer. Sorry, Linus. But but it's not yet allowed to have tumor regression. And we know that measurement error is a problem. So let's say 30% regression in the tumor. That will allow for all the sloppiness of CT scan positioning by technicians and everything else to be taken into account. 30% shows efficacy. It's something that most people who are who are in the field would agree to. In fact, if you look at the LISTEN website, lifesavingtherapies.com, you'll see a international list of who's who of oncologists, researchers, and others who believe that this is the proper approach. We need to grant marketing approval for single agents based on high response rates in phase 1 and phase 2 studies. When we know we can define the molecular issue the patient has, and where benefit from other therapies is unlikely. I'll give you my wife, for example. My wife, when she had her disease, the thing that OHIP would pay for, the treatment OHIP would pay for, or ODB or whoever it is paid for it, said, we're going to give you docetaxel and carboplatin. It's well known that docetaxel and carboplatin don't work in her case. But they wouldn't pay for the one that would work in her case, because nobody had gotten around to figuring out that for 3% of the people, this would work better. So she got the right drug, but it was through heroic efforts, and people shouldn't have to have heroes fighting for them. It should be a matter of course. And the whole matter of this raises the whole matter of ethics. I'm probably not doing this in the right. Bill's really organized. I'm not that organized. But who gives you the right to tell me what to put in my body? What is this paternalistic, upside down approval process and access process? The system says it's protecting me, but you're really stifling the rapid creation of and the rapid access to therapies that could extend life or manage lethal diseases chronically. And you know, a lot of the clinical trial protocols, if you ever read the Emperor of all Maladies, and you read the history of how they beat leukemia, how many people did they kill? They killed millions of people in doing this. Physician do no harm is a joke. They did a lot of harm. Did a lot of harm in this, in the guise of research. And in fact, just in case you're interested, physician do no harm does not appear in the Hippocratic Oath. It appears in the prologue to the Hippocratic Oath. But the actual Hippocratic Oath says, you, the doctor, must provide the best care option that you can find for your patient, whether or not it costs a lot of money and whether or not they can pay for it. If they can pay for it, you can charge them. That's what the Hippocratic Oath says. And as one prominent oncologist, a co-author of mine in one of these papers said, and it's again on our website, she's not afraid to say it, I am sick and tired of treating my patients with drugs that I know don't work, because that's what we'll pay for. Now, if I can just talk a little bit about the question of orphan drugs. I hate to break it to you, but cancer is an orphan drug, an orphan disease. Every cancer is a snowflake. They look like the same. They look the same from far away. When you get up close, everyone is different. I've had cancer. I almost died from cancer. My wife died from cancer. I know a lot of people with cancer, some of whom are no longer with us. And every time they say, "Oh, it's metastasized. Your cancer's migrated." Well, if you look at the base camp, it might have 4 or 5 submutations. If you look at the first camp it sets up, the first metastasis, it might have 7 or 8 submutations, 3 of which are the same as the first one. It's gotten other ones and other ones and other ones. So every disorder that's cancerous is in fact an orphan disease. So we have to apply this thinking, this orphan disease thinking, to every lethal disease we know. And I'm now only arguing for ones that I know will kill you in 2 years, because that's politically probably the only way we're going to make any headway here. But this also goes for and probably applies to a lot of other diseases. We don't have, and I'll end with this, we don't have a national strategy for precision medicine. Why? We're like bumbling along, typical Canadians. Well, I don't know. What do you think, George? Well, I think it's pretty good. Well, I don't know. Well, no one hand on the other. The United States has one. They put $215 million up for table stakes. Billions are being spent on personalized medicine. Personalized medicine, and I mean precision medicine now, not, my mother says I should drink grapefruit juice, so please put that in the syringe, doctor. I'm talking about precision medicine is the way of the future. We don't have a national strategy for it. We don't know how to promote it. We don't know how to organize our research for it. We don't know how to organize our clinical trials for it. We've got a brand new CCTTM or CTTAM, whatever they call it, thing, the asset map for clinical trials. We don't have any distributed clinical trials in Canada. Why is that? I don't understand. I don't understand why any of this is passing us by. We should be front and center and leading and cooperatively pursuing an international strategy for precision medicine, because our system of regulation, not our payer system, but our system of regulation is so much simpler and less labyrinthine than the one in the States. We should be able to take the lead, and we're not. So with that, I think the last thing I should say is that we should have more patient voices, more people who are patients, who are caregivers, involved in all levels of these processes. But they should be given a seat at the table only if they know what they're talking about. We don't want somebody, just by virtue of the fact that they got sick or took care of somebody, to be at the table. We want informed patients, an informed patient voice, which will work together with doctors, policymakers, regulators to produce a productive, forward-looking, progress-centered, not only regulatory framework, but care system.
Thanks, John Peter. That's you've made the case for patient and progress-centered framework for cancer care in Canada, and certainly plugging in terms of what's happening globally. Distributed clinical trials, where you don't just have one site and everyone has to drive to Oshawa to get care. I think you told me a story about you bringing your wife and having to hit the road.
We actually, I made a bed for her in the car, and she was in the bed. I was in the car. We were driving out of the driveway. My cell phone rang. I picked up the phone. It was the nurse in Oshawa saying, "Don't bother coming," because I wouldn't get into it, because some lawyer found a comma somewhere that excluded her from the trial. But we got her the drug the next day anyway through another means.
The thing I take away from what you're saying, and what I heard you say earlier, is that and you've heard me say it to you personally, your wife was very lucky to have you helping her and working with her. You were very lucky as a cancer survivor to have a very good relationship with your oncologist and the clinical team around you to be able to get the care that you needed. And one of the other lessons I think that the whole Canadian Cancer Survivor Network is very strong on, and the whole cancer community is, work with each other. Not every patient has got access to the same kind of resources that you have, and not every patient is like you. I mean, I'm actually sitting in John Peter's office and study. The place is surrounded by books. The Merck manual is behind you, so you know a lot more about medicine than quite a few doctors, I would imagine.
Probably in some cases.
Yeah. So thank you very much. We've got a few questions, and I want to get to those because we only have about 10 minutes. But just a quick word on the way that Canadians today get access to products that are not approved in Canada. Many times it is through a clinical trial, but also many times it's through a special access program, and that's when.
Do you want me to talk about that?
Do you want to talk? Do you have experience with the SAP?
What a mess! Yes.
Well, then jump right in.
Well, the special access program. This partnership Bill was talking about, Dave Stewart and I and Annie, my wife, we formed a partnership, and we actually got her experimental drugs that nobody else had ever gotten. One drug was gotten through the special access program. It took a file as thick as Encyclopedia Britannica, four volumes to go through. It was done in speedy time, 4 weeks. Nuts. Compassionate access. So, I mean, the program does exist. They do the best they can, but again, the documentation is onerous, the stuff is onerous. The special access program needs to be turned on its head. We need a smart, and I'll say this, but please don't take me the wrong way, a smart version of the right to try legislation. We have dumb right to try legislation in the States is if you want it, you can get it basically. But we need something that's a little smarter than that. That says if it's if it's precision medicine, it's got through a rigorous phase 1 with a phase 2 toxicity efficacy component, you should get it. Bang, like that. My wife died with a drug that was approved in the hospital. It was in the hospital pharmacy, and they wouldn't give it to her because the IRB,
the research board,
the ethics board of the hospital, had not yet met, and they didn't have a meeting for another 2 weeks. She'd still be alive if that drug were here, if she had gotten that drug.
Wow. And other people who get access through the special access program as well, the payers will not have that on their list in most cases. I mean, Ontario has the exceptional access program, but generally actually getting these products paid for. And instead of actually going through any of these issues on the screen, I think I want to jump to some of the questions. And first of all, just to acknowledge, thank you, Patty from Biocan RX, for joining us today and for clarifying that Dr. John Bell is in fact a PhD and not a medical doctor. So,
well, we knew that anyway. We were just trying to make him feel good.
yeah, there you go. So shout out to John too. But David Foster, you're writing in to say that you're on a very expensive drug that has been recently brought into Canada, and your question is about cost. Who decides the price of a drug, and when will a drug price change? In other words, go down, and how will you pay for an expensive, essential for life drug when your healthcare money, which is in this case Blue Cross, is used up? And you're in a situation like many Canadians, in fact, about 24 million, the strong majority of Canadians rely on a private insurance program to access their the first dollar coverage. But sometimes when I'm speaking with somebody from the cancer agency, I was recently doing that with a health charity, and they tell patients as soon as they find out that they have cancer, apply for the catastrophic drug program available in your province. That's Trillium in Ontario. So that when that money runs out, and if that drug, that medicine is actually on the approved list of products that will be reimbursed by the cancer agency, then it will only cost you up to a certain percentage of your income, and even that deductible or copay, I should say, is waived in many cases if you're a welfare recipient or you don't have enough money. And generally in Canada, that percentage of your income that can be the maximum amount that you would have to copay for products on catastrophic drug coverage in Canada, it really ranges from 3% to around 10 or 11%. But in terms of your other question around price, the list price or the price that you will see or even pay at the pharmacy is often very different from what the payer actually pays, I should say. And secondly, it's actually impacted in several other stages. So right now we're talking about Health Canada. The next level of review is the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board, where the federal agency that controls prices in Canada says this is the maximum allowable price for sale for this product to protect consumers in across the country, no matter if they're private payers or insurers or out of pocket or through the drug programs. This next stage of review actually can bring the effective price down further. That's the health technology assessment stage, where a manufacturer will say, this is the price that I'm actually going to offer it to the public drug programs, and that's often very less than what the federal regulator would count it as. And then the third level of review that actually does effectively bring the price down, at least for public payers and increasingly private payers, and that's a negotiation with the manufacturer. And the challenge for manufacturers often is that they have to sell these products around the world are referencing the prices of different jurisdictions. And so what you have is negotiated confidential prices that end up with rebates that go back to the payer that bring the effective price down. I think the challenge, and I don't know your particular situation, I probably can't comment on it, David, but the price that you see that is paid is not necessarily the one that would end up being paid by the province or the cancer agency that would hopefully end up covering your product. So that's not to say that the prices and costs aren't like a live and growing and challenging issue. They really are. But to John Peters' point earlier, if we're talking about precision medicine and it only works on 3% of patients who have this certain gene mutation, in the old days, a manufacturer would be able to come up with a product that would be used by the thousands of cancer patients in this solid tumor across the country. These days, if you're targeting a certain type of tumor and only a very small percentage of that, in order to pay for the R&D and other development costs of that, the prices will be higher. I think that the progress-centered regulations, and this actually just came out of the EMA recently, I think even today, it was reported today, there's an expectation that if they can shorten and improve and speed up the access to the market for some of these products, that there should be a commensurate lowering of price.
Actually, we have financial models that show that, in fact, that's the case, and I didn't want to get into that today. But David, one of the things you might try just on a personal basis is call a drug company and say, look, I can't afford it anymore. Help me.
Yeah, so the next question is not so much a question, but Susan, really thank you for your comment about John Peters' story and experience and perspective. And maybe, do you have anything you can tell the listeners about Listen and how they can maybe get involved and not just listen, but honestly, a shout out and hats off to the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network for inviting Listen to explain what you're doing. But we didn't really get into that. What is Listen doing, and how can people remain engaged on these issues, John Peter?
Okay, well, right, you can actually, there's a somewhere on that website, there's a I want to join or something on the website. You can click on that, and there's some questions that you'll be asked, and then we'll answer you. So if you want to get involved and Listen, that's how you do it. You just click on whatever the thing is. The website's not up in front of me right now, but there's a little link, and you click on it, and you put in your name and so on and so forth, and then we'll get back to you. Listen, right now, we on February 4, our thing right now is to try to, as Bill said, we're focused on approval, regulatory reform, approvals and clinical research reform, and also to facilitate timely reimbursement for effective treatments for lethal diseases. And we are starting to roll out. We go to give educational seminars to legislators. We give educational seminars. There'll be a big thing in the Mars Center on World Cancer Day, where we're going to talk about progress-centered regulation. We're going to have a roundtable. We're going to bring together a bunch of people from industry, from oncology community, from the research community, regulators, patients, to talk about putting together a roadmap for change, specific issues, concrete action plan, and then we're just going to roll that out. So really, we're about awareness and education, but awareness, it's called what we used to call action research in my day when I was back in school back in 1822.
Excellent. 1918 to 1922, John Peter?
1822.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Old man.
Yeah, no, that's not true. We don't have the video right now. Patty, just in fact, that might have been a bit of an answer to what Patty's asking in terms of what first, payment for cancer treatment administered outside of hospital. I think that's an important issue that the Can Certainty campaign is certainly tackling.
Bucket trials are a good idea, but they're only a little piece of it.
But the point is, I think, Patty, that what Listen's trying to do is get everyone together to figure out what the priorities are and how to fix what first.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, well, we know we want to. I mean, we actually are evolving. If you read the Journal of Clinical Cancer Research, October 15th issue, I don't know what the name of the article is, but I'll tell you in a second. There's an article. It's called "The Urgent Need for Clinical Research Reform to Permit Faster, Less Expensive Access to New Therapies for Lethal Diseases." Clinical Cancer Research Journal, October 15th. We outline specifically what we'd like to see happen, and in the order we'd like to see it happen. I'm one of the authors, so it's definitely we. Everybody on that paper besides me is an MD, and they're all members of Listen. The Cancer Advocacy Coalition of Canada has its annual report card coming out in January. And there'll be a lead article there written by me, which basically says much of the same things. But we want to get this roundtable together, and we want to say, okay, here's our proposal. Let's tear it apart. Let's put it in some order. Let's make some stuff happen. We know the bucket trials, for example, umbrella trials. We know all these things are happening willy-nilly all over the place. And we also know that there's a whole other issue. The other issue is payment. Payment is a big problem. 486 days, is it on average, or 468 days to get the numbers backwards, but 468 to get the benefit of the doubt days between approval of a drug and OHIP paying for it. Hello? It's a year and 100 days for before. I mean, and then we have the absurdity of, well, if you go to the hospital and take your pill, it's free. You put the pill in your pocket and take it home and take it, it's not free. Yeah. So all of these things have to be dealt with, but we want to knock them off in some systematic order, and that's what we're trying to do. Put together, and we're moving rather rapidly. I mean, Listen was only founded about 6 months ago. So we're moving to the roundtable. We'll have the roundtable probably in the early spring, and we'll be talking to people incessantly, and every day I talk to people until they're sick and tired of hearing me.
No, this is good. Well, and the audience is really not sick and tired of hearing you. We only had an hour, and you only had a portion of that, John Peter. So I think that this is to be continued. Today we spent a lot of time talking about Health Canada and that review and evaluation part of the whole system. But as you said, upwards of, and sometimes longer, 500 days even after it can be sold in Canada in terms of payment. And there are several other webinars that we've helped host and that the SurvivorNet group has actually put online. So really encourage you to watch those too. But maybe we have to do another one on how to unpack and deal with that extra 500 days.
That would be good. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's yes, that is a particularly thorny issue, that whole thing. I mean, people don't understand even how to value drugs. The value of drugs, nobody pays attention to the socioeconomic benefits of the drugs. If we shorten the drug approval process, make the clinical research thing, we're going to make the drugs not $800 million, but $80 million to get to market. I can show you how that can happen easily. I have a financial model for that. There's all kinds of stuff we could talk about that would make it easier and better.
Okay, well, to be continued. Thank you very much to the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network, to Mona for helping kick this off, and to Matt for making all of the technical stuff work so well. Thank you. I see we've kept 21 people on the line, so really appreciate everyone phoning in and dialing in. Please note that if you didn't get a chance to participate today, this will be archived and online quite soon. So encourage other people to watch and listen.
Listen.
I know, it's so easy to plug. Listen. But thank you very much for joining today, and we'll see you next time. All the best for the holiday season. This is the last webinar, I understand, for the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network. Back to you, Mona, if you're still on the line, and if not, wishing everyone all the best.
Thank you, Bill. So I'd like to thank you, Bill, as well as John Peter, for joining us today and offering your expertise to us on this subject. We'd also like to thank all our sponsors for our 2015 webinar series, Novartis, Merck, and especially Boehringer Ingelheim for making today's particular webinar possible. The webinar will be online tomorrow, if not later today, but tomorrow for sure. And there'll be a full video on YouTube as well as slides, which will be on the CCSN SlideShare. Links to both will be sent out tomorrow. This, to all of you who attended, this is our last webinar, as Bill mentioned, of the season of 2015. We'll hope to see you all in the new year. We hope you all have a wonderful holiday season, and stay tuned to our newsletter to have hints about all the things to come in the new year. Thank you all. Goodbye.